We're going to turn now to two key senators. Republican Lindsey Graham, he is joining us from his home state in South Carolina. Democrat Mark Warner of Virginia, he'll be a key player, and he is with us here in the studio. Senator Warner, let me just start with you. What do you heard what Senator McConnell said? Where do you think this is headed?
Well, Bob, I think we need to step back a moment and say we just went through an awful period for our country.
He basically agrees with
you.
And
listen, the numbers are coming in. $24 billion hit to the economy. We actually increased the deficit. You can't start and stop the largest enterprise in the world, the federal government, without added costs. We've actually built in higher interest rates because anytime we get close to a potential default, we're going to have higher T-bill pricing. That's been built in. That passes through to mortgage costs, car loans, student loans. So what we need to do now is, I'm an advocate of a big deal, but we ought to at least first start and make sure that we actually operate the government for a year going forward with a solid budget and find ways to alleviate some of the damage also being done by sequestration, which is this automatic spending cuts, which Lindsey and I and a whole group of others say was the stupidest way possible to go about cutting government.
Senator Graham, you heard your leader. Where do you think this is going now?
Well, I think what would be good for the country if the Budget Committee reported out a bill by December the 13th that did three things. Fund some infrastructure. There's a lot of bipartisan support for infrastructure funding for our roads, our bridges, and our ports. And the president should give Democrats some political cover to reform entitlements, and Republicans need to be courageous enough to flatten out the tax code. And if we did those three things and replace sequestration, we could end this year on a very positive note.
Do you think there's any chance that something like that could happen?
With presidential leadership, well, I think it would take leadership. The public is ready for the Congress to behave better. This is a second chance. It would help us all. 60% of the people in the United States want to fire every one of us. I understand that. But if we could come together and pay for an infrastructure bill, Mark is working on an infrastructure system of funding. If the president would give cover to Democrats to enact CPI changes that he's already embraced, and people like me would agree to bring in revenue not by raising taxes, by flattening out the tax code and bring in some repatriated corporate earnings at a lower rate, apply that money to the to infrastructure, we could replace sequestration in whole and in part, and would help us all. It'd help the country. So it's there to be had with some leadership.
Senator Graham, what do you think the impact of all this has been on the Republican Party, your party?
It's a wake-up call. Where conservatism is an asset to the Republican Party. We're a right-of-center nation. We're not a right-ditch nation. I think we've learned that this was a political gift to the president by the Republican Party at the time he needed it the most. The tactic of defunding the government unless he repealed his signature issue was as poorly designed as Obamacare itself, almost. I can't imagine President Bush agreeing to repeal the Bush tax cuts if the Democrats had challenged him with the following proposition: we will fund all the government, Mr. President, if you, President Bush, would give up on your tax cuts. President Obama was never going to give up on his signature issue. But as a party, we got to do some soul searching, and I hope our House colleagues will follow Speaker Boehner. The only way the government can shut down is not what Senator Cruz says, but what the House does. So President Obama, work with John Boehner. Work with Harry Reid, Senator Reid. Senator Reid, stop moving the goalpost on Speaker Boehner. To my House Republican colleagues, follow Speaker Boehner. He's a good man. If we'll do all this, we won't shut the government down again.
All right. Well, we're going to come back to both you and Senator Warner and talk some more about this in 1 minute. Back now with Senators Graham and Warner. Senator Warner, you heard Senator Graham lay out what he thinks the path is here. He also talks about how badly Republicans were hurt. Was your party hurt by this, and where do you think this all goes now?
Well, Bob, there were really no winners. I mean, our country took an economic hit. We also took, I think, a confidence hit in terms of the American public. I understand why people are mad and heck at all of us. And we took a hit in the world stage. Look at when you see China and Russia saying, let's de-dollarize the world. Let's move away from an American-driven economy. So I think, and Lindsey and I, we found that we have a lot of common agreement. We're working on infrastructure together. We ought to put this in an order, order of three things. First, we got to show we can govern. Basic governance means we've got to put a budget in place where we go at least for a year without any threat of a fiscal crisis. Then on top of that, we ought to find common agreement where we can make these investments in infrastructure and replace some of the damage being done that I think on the defense side and on the discretionary side around sequestration. There are smarter ways to cut government than sequestration. And then I believe that the single biggest thing we could do for our economy, single biggest job creator, would be to put together a bigger bargain that includes revenues, that includes entitlement reform. We all know at the end of the day, Republicans are going to have to give on revenues, Democrats are going to have to give on entitlement reform. We do that, the confidence building that would take place, I actually believe it would do more for job creation than any other program we've talked about.
Senator Graham, you talked about what's going on in the House of Representatives. Do you think Speaker John Boehner is going to survive all this?
I hope so. I hope people rally around John and learn from this tactical mistake that they made regarding defunding Obamacare. John is ready to do a big deal. They were $150 billion apart, he and President Obama. So as we go back into the budget negotiations, I hope that under Paul Ryan's leadership and with some presidential leadership, we can do what Mark just talked about, an infrastructure bill that would allow us to create jobs, entitlement reform and tax code reform. And John Boehner is a willing participant, so is Mitch McConnell. We've got a unique opportunity here after this debacle called the shutdown to re-energize the Congress and maybe get in better standing. But John Boehner, please follow John.
What about Senator Ted Cruz? I asked Senator McConnell 6 ways from Sunday about how he was going to handle that part of it from here on in, and he didn't really give me any specifics. Is Ted Cruz hurt your party?
Well, I think the tactical choice that he embraced hurt our party. Ted's a smart guy, but Ted Cruz can't shut the government down. What shuts the government down is when the House and the Senate can't agree on a funding number. And our president has been virtually AWOL. This idea, I won't negotiate. The president of the United States needs to get involved with Boehner and Senator Reid to try to bring this together. The political marketplace will determine Ted Cruz's future. We helped President Obama when he needed our help the most. After this debacle called the shutdown, our party's been hurt. Our brand name is at its lowest ever. Obamacare actually got a bump in polling, and we got in the way of a disastrous rollout. So from my point of view, this was a tactical choice that hurt us. But the good news for the Republican Party is the debacle is over if we don't do it again, and Obamacare is a continuing debacle. One quick story. A friend of mine owns 52 Wendy's. He's put pen to paper. He has 40% of his workforce insured today. Under Obamacare, if 20% choose insurance, his insurance costs will double. That story is repeating itself throughout the economy. Obamacare is a debacle that will go into 2014. The shutdown should be in our rearview mirror as Republicans. Don't do this again, Ted.
All right, I will just respond that the White House says it won't happen that way. I'm sorry, we're out of time, but I want to thank both senators for being here this morning. Back in a minute with some personal thoughts.